They'd just come off of releasing one of the most ambitious and eclectic albums ever created. But instead of celebrating like they naturally should have been, something was off. The band was straying apart, tensions were escalating, and that dream that they'd once worked so hard to build together was officially beginning to crumble. This is the story of the aftermath of the White Album, a time period of film projects, solo detours, and a quiet unraveling, even as the rest of the world was still passionately pleading for more Beatles. Let's get into the morning after the madness. So by the end of 1968, the White Album had absolutely exploded across the world, everywhere. A double album, 30 tracks, 4 vastly different voices, pulling at completely different directions. And yet, despite all that, or rather, due to all those factors, it still worked. Well, sort of. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was tense. There's no hiding that. The recording sessions ran for months. It ran so long. Several of the tracks were practically solo efforts. And Ringo, he literally walked out at one point. Although in the end, they were able to get it together and pull it off, their cracks were showing. They were fully exposed. And there was no hiding the fact that the Beatles were not quite the Beatles anymore. You know what I mean? Not in the way that they used to be. At the top of 1969, they found themselves back in London, not in the studio, but in sophisticated suit and tie, buttoned up meetings. Their new company, Apple Corps, was supposed to be a utopia for artists, imagined to be this creative haven. But it was quickly becoming a money pit. Apple Boutique had already gone bust, and no one quite knew who was running what. It was kind of like one of those stalemate situations, you know? Paul McCartney tried to take the reins. He organized business meetings, brought in advisors, stepped up, showed up, worked hard, etc. That only backfired and made everything worse. Why? Well, because he didn't run the Beatles. Not alone, not officially. And the others started to resent him for acting like he did. These are just, that's how they felt. These were their feelings. You know, artists, how temperamental and sensitive they can be. To solve the chaos, Paul came up with an idea, because that's just the kind of guy he is. Problem solver. He proposed, why don't they just go back to the basics? No overdubs, no studio tricks, nothing fancy like that. Just the 4 of them. Raw, real. Most importantly, together. And you know what? Why not film it while they're at it? And this idea would later become known as the Get Back Sessions, later released as Let It Be. Spoiler alert, this did not go well. They started in January of 1969 at Twickenham Studios, a cavernous, cold soundstage that, to be blunt, couldn't have felt less musical. The idea was to rehearse new material, film it all, and then perform it live. But the energy was wrong. George was frustrated beyond what I could fathom. John was disengaged completely. He was checked out. And Ringo was silent. So once again, we have Paul steering this sinking ship, and no one liked his direction. George eventually, at one point, got up and said, I think I'll be leaving the band right about now. Just like that. To give him all the grace he so deserves, George did in fact come back a few days later, but only after a serious heart-to-heart, and only if they agreed to change locations away from Gloomville, dreary Twickenham, and into their more comfortable, warmer Apple Studios. Oh, and if they... No live show. Not yet. Through all this, John was in metamorphosis. He was deeply in love with Yoko Ono. And the media, made her a scapegoat, but the truth is, John was evolving, his very own personal thing, and the band didn't quite know what to do with that. He and Yoko were like this. They were inseparable. They made experimental albums together. They staged bed-ins for peace, and each day it seemed like more and more he had one foot out the Beatles' door. Now, if you're wondering how many feet John Lennon had to begin with, I don't know. I didn't think about it until after I said the idiom out loud. But anyways, in regards to his separation of the Beatles, the press hated it, and fans were confused, but more than anything, terrified. But John, he was finding his ground again. He was finding his voice, just not necessarily with the band. We're gonna harp on the challenges. We gotta touch on the rosier moments too, because there was one moment of magic during the Get Back sessions. Billy Preston, a keyboardist they'd met in Hamburg, he happened to stop by while they were at Apple Studios. They invited him to play, and it was like a moment of golden sunshine. They loosened up, they played their music so freely, and for a moment there, they were a band. They were a band called the Beatles. Preston's presence reminded them of how fun it could be, how fun music is. Smiles returned, tensions eased, at least for a golden moment there. It's January 30th, 1969, and to cap off their sessions, they climb up to the rooftop of Apple Corps and perform an impromptu concert. Oh, but it's cold, it's windy, the amps weren't built for outdoor shows, and you know what? It didn't matter. For 42 minutes, they were electric, a spectacle. You know, it would be their very last performance as a band ever. And what a send-off, raw, alive, totally unannounced. Police shut it down like any good party, but not before they'd made history. While all this was happening, the Beatles' personal lives were pulling them in separate directions. Paul was falling in love with Linda Eastman, a photographer and artist who gave him a new sense of joy and stability and perspective. George was growing even closer, if you could believe it, to spirituality and Indian music, and he was spending more time with Ravi Shankar. Ringo, as always, was steady, but even he was exploring new opportunities and the possibilities of what's out there, like acting. So you see, at this point, it wasn't animosity. It was simply severance, nothing more to it. They weren't so much fighting each other as fighting for themselves. Cue the moment where things start to get slippery, right on time. John brought in a new business manager, Alan Klein, known for working with the Rolling Stones. Klein promised to fix up Apple Corps and make them richer than ever. Paul didn't trust him. He wanted to bring in his soon-to-be in-laws, the Eastmans. The rest of the band went with Klein. And this business riff would become a greater wedge that would quietly splinter them for good. It wouldn't be over the music. It would be over lawyers, contracts, control. Stuff that's not so fun. Here's the twist. Despite all the drama, or you know what, maybe even because of it, they decided to make one more album, but none of the Get Back material. Something new. They reunited with good old trusty George Martin and returned to Abbey Road Studios, and all agreed to leave all the tension at the door and just focus on creating something beautiful and magical together one more time. What they wound up creating was their final masterpiece. But hey, that's a story for another day.